Well, just a couple days ago, we hit the 2-year mark for the start of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. But it had me wondering, what will define success for the three host nations in 2 years' time? Well, we're going to try and answer those questions now. Guys, Matty G back here with you on Football with Flags. Thanks so much for joining us, as always, as we take a deep dive between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. We'll start with the neighbors up north in Canada, and this will be just their third ever World Cup appearance. And I really think this is one of the best streaks that Canada's men's national team has ever had. And again, while they're still looking for their first ever World Cup win, I think one of the most impressive feats that they have had to date was winning the World Cup qualifying table back in 2022. Now, again, 2022 didn't go the way that they had wanted during the group stage, but still some very impressive wins, picking up points against the United States and Mexico throughout the table, along with some really other good, impressive wins against other CONCACAF teams. But before we get to defining success for the 2026 World Cup, we want to look at Copa America and the Gold Cup next summer as well with the expanded field. Now, Canada is in a very tough group with Argentina, obviously the defending champions, highly favored once again this time around, but also Chile and Peru are nothing to slouch over either. Peru have made some deep runs in the last couple of competitions, and Chile have back-to-back titles within the last decade. Granted, they are aging a little bit, and who knows how they're going to be able to play, but still, this is a very tough group. If Canada is able to get out of the group, I think a quarterfinal would be successful in my opinion. I don't know if they're going to get any farther. Could be very tough to play against Mexico or Ecuador, the two teams I have favored in Group B if they do get out of the group. But still, for Canada to get out of this group would be a success, and to get to at least a knockout fixture would definitely be a success in my opinion. For the 2025 Gold Cup, though, again, we're having an expanded field of 24 teams. Still unsure which teams we'll see come over to North America to play in that competition. But for Canada, I think really a quarterfinal or semifinal run in that tournament is certainly possible. We've seen some decent and impressive results in the Gold Cup previously, but again, I think they'll have a much stronger roster this time around as well in 2025. Definitely think they could easily get through the group stage with really no fuss. It would depend on kind of how the layout of the knockout fixtures look, but I certainly think that for Canada, a quarterfinal or semifinal is definitely within their reach. And they still have a pretty young roster too. Obviously, Borjan is starting to age out. He might be the first to retire. Jonathan Osorio, Junior Hoylett, but still, I think that this group is in a pretty good state, obviously moving forward. And considering Jesse Marsch just took over, not an ideal result against Netherlands in their friendly, but still a draw against France is nothing to slouch over, regardless what time of year it is that they played. Again, I think that depending on who comes over, could be a little bit tougher for Canada, but they're set up for the future really well. So with that being said, the 2026 World Cup, again, the expanded field of 48 teams, certainly think Canada should be able to get out of the group, get their first ever win, which would be a huge success, hopefully win their group or at least finish second. And from that point on, I think a round of 16 bid, for me, in my opinion, would be success for Canada. Now, granted, they'd have to get past the round of 32, but still a very impressive run potentially for them if they can make it to a round of 16. Now we'll move on to Mexico, who are currently ranked 14th in the world, but really not playing like it at times, to be totally honest with you. Still a lot of questions over this roster, managerial decisions, where this federation's headed. Are they setting themselves up for success in the next couple of years and beyond? Still a lot to be answered for this side. Granted, though, they did just come off of a Gold Cup victory. We know how impressive that they can play in the United States and in their home turf with the fan base that travels so well. But again, this team is so decorated with 9 Gold Cup titles. This will be the third time that they've ever hosted the World Cup, first time co-hosting. But keep in mind, with that streak of round of 16 exits that we've seen with this side, the last quarterfinal that they made was in 1986, the last time that they hosted the World Cup. So certainly hoping that they can jump over that. But the question begs, with the expansion of the field, does the round of 32 count? Or are we still kind of counting the round of 16 as that block that they can't get over? We'll get to that in just a minute. Looking at the Copa America group that they have this year, Ecuador, Venezuela, Jamaica, I think it's pretty wide open. I did have Mexico getting out of the group, but still, Venezuela and Jamaica are nothing to slouch over, and I think Ecuador has a great chance to win the group as well. But for Mexico, this is a huge opportunity against better competition than what they saw in the Gold Cup last summer to really propel themselves forward and hopefully start to try and build some momentum for the next couple of years. And this is a great chance with a group that is a bit vulnerable, in my opinion, still wide open, but a great opportunity for Mexico with such a great fan base behind them to help support them and hopefully push them along the way. I think a quarterfinal is certainly good enough for Mexico in this case. I think it's going to be very difficult for them to get any farther. Would you call that a success or not, though? I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure. Again, the question is, though, if they don't finish first in this group, they're more than likely going to have to play Argentina in the next round. And granted, they play against Argentina really well. They usually get up for those big games, but we'll have to wait and see whether or not they're up for the task. Obviously, this is a different group than the teams that we've seen in years past, especially over the last decade and 15 years or so as well. But for the Gold Cup in 2025, I definitely think a semifinal or final run for them should be in the cards. They can definitely do it. Really not have any fuss with the group stage, but then once they get to the round of 16 and beyond, I definitely think this Mexican side could push forward, and hopefully with another year under their belt and hopefully maybe a little bit more stability, they can get to a place like that with the semifinal or maybe even a shot at a final. For me, I think would be success for them. But for the 2026 World Cup, kind of going back to the whole round of 16 thing, definitely should make it out of the group, no questions asked. But when they get to the round of 32 again, who knows if they're going to see maybe a weaker side depending on how they do in the group stage. For me, though, they've got to get to a quarterfinal to be successful in this tournament. I know, again, you've got that extra round in front of the round of 16 now, but I know Mexico's not going to be satisfied with that. They're not going to look at the round of 32 and think, well, at least we got over that hump. No, it's still the round of 16. It's still the one block that's, been the biggest hurdle for them over the last several decades. And knowing they have to get by it is going to be super important. Keep in mind, though, it's not like Mexico have played any slouches over the years when it comes to this round. I mean, they've been knocked out by Germany, Brazil, Netherlands, one of the best United States teams we've ever seen, Argentina a couple times as well. So again, for Mexico, this is a huge opportunity for them to get over the hump and get to a quarterfinal. I don't know if they make it past a quarterfinal, but I think if they get to at least that third round of knockouts, that would be a success for the 2026 World Cup. Now for the United States, currently ranked 11th in the world. This will be the second time that they've ever hosted, of course, first being back in 1994. They got to the round of 16, got knocked out by Brazil. But again, this team has had a lot of great success here in recent years with CONCACAF Nations League, the Gold Cup. But more questions certainly need to be asked of Greg Berhalter and just this roster in general. They're very, very talented and a generational group, but can they get over the hump when the questions are asked the most, especially in difficult times against difficult teams? This round, this group in Copa America, certainly they should be able to get through. Who knows if they're going to be able to win it or not with how well Uruguay could potentially be playing, but certainly the United States have to be favored to get out of the group first or second in a lot of different scenarios. But the thing about this, though, is that they're probably, unless something crazy happens, they're probably going to go up against Brazil or Colombia in the quarterfinal. For me, I think that even if they lose that game, I don't want to call it a failure just because, again, it's not like that they play in this tournament all the time. Copa America is more for the South American countries. If they get to a semifinal, fantastic. I'd certainly call that a success. But I'm not going to be totally bitter or upset if they do get knocked out in the quarterfinal, considering just how good Brazil and Colombia can be. Obviously, Brazil at times, recently with some World Cup qualifying games, haven't played great, but Colombia are certainly on a tear. They've won 22 straight games. They're going to be very difficult to go up against again, despite the fact of how poorly they played against them in a friendly last week. But definitely, I would say a quarterfinal at least. At least take it to extra time or penalties would, for me, it feel a little bit more like a success if they do get eliminated. But for the 2025 Gold Cup, just like Mexico, it's got to be a semifinal or a final, in my opinion. Again, still a lot of questions up in the air about who's coming over from different confederations and going to be involved in the tournament. But for the U.S., this is a huge chance. I think we're not going to see the type of roster we've seen from them in the Gold Cup, where it's been some younger players, guys that aren't quite often regulars in the side. I think we're going to see as strong of a team as possible, knowing This is better for them to prepare for obviously 2026 and what's going to come the year after as well. So a semifinal or final for the U.S. is definitely the route that they have to get to, or for me, I think it is a failure in that aspect. But for the 2026 World Cup, really hard to tell. Again, this is an unbelievable group, and I think that they still have some upside to them, but they have struggled so much against beating teams in the top 20 in the world. They've put on some great performances against some weaker sides, but when it comes to the Germanys, the Frances, the Netherlands, the other South American teams that we see, they've struggled to get past it. And again, while we want to maybe kind of put them in this big category of thinking, hey, they could get to a semifinal or final of that World Cup, considering we're hosting and we're going to have so much support behind the team, etc. For me, I'm not sure that that's totally realistic, knowing, again, just how talented the rest of the world is. So for me, I think a quarterfinal run for the U.S. would be a success. Anything beyond that, I think, would still feel like a bit of a failure, because the U.S. are pretty similar to Mexico, that they have really struggled to get past that round of 16 in the few chances that they've had over the last few decades. And again, I think it's still been a tough pill to swallow ever since that quarterfinal loss to Germany a couple decades ago. But the U.S. have got to really be able to put that kind of stuff behind them and say, look, we are a better team now than we were in the last couple of years. We can certainly get past the round of 32 and the round of 16 to a quarterfinal. For me, I think that would be success, but still a lot up in the air to decide. Well, guys, as always, thanks again so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already done so. And let us know down in the comments as well what you would define success as for Canada, Mexico, and the United States going into 2026. Guys, I hope you all enjoyed the Euros, Copa America, and everything coming up. We're going to have plenty more content on those as the tournaments unfold. So make sure you stay tuned. And until next time, we'll see you soon.